So today we'll be talking about college, university, college and university education in Japan and in the United States. So the main idea is that the strengths and weakness of Japan's and United States education systems are direct consequences of their respective priorities each country places on their equality and and achievements in academics and individual freedom. So for Japan, I'll be talking about Japan and I'll be talking about Juken Jigoku, which translates to extreme entrance exam culture. So there is a really harsh competition with top tier universities, especially national universities, which are called Kokuritsu, Kokuritsu Daigaku. And they are known for their competition because of their tuition, because they're almost half the price for like private universities. Second, uh, guaranteeing and securing career placements through job hunting and in their junior and senior years. Third, backloaded model, which is like as for US, I heard like GPAs matter, but like for Japan, like it doesn't really matter as much. And it's really backloaded on a single test with like job interviews. Let's see, personal thoughts like early job hunting junior and senior causes poor environment atmosphere. And it really isn't like a place for learning. It's more like where you're just getting grades for your next social like working years. And here's a picture of like students taking exams, and it's pretty unique in that like Japan has like like the universities have their own exams made for just for their schools. So like so students will have to prep for all these tests they want uh for whichever school they want to apply for. And next I'll be talking about campus and academic life. Universities and college start in April in Japan, where as in Korea it starts in March. So it's a month after Korea. And whereas in States, I know it's usually in September. Uh, they focus more on like circle activities, which is also known as extracurricular activities. They have bands and they have sports or other activities. Students focus on getting grade points or they really just work on like circle activities. They work on getting certificates for job hunting, or they get in a seminar class, which has professors of their own faculty like them leading their classes with like some kind of projects. And there's over college doesn't really function as a place for learning, but rather a social preparatory school before working. And for modern challenges, there's a huge shrinking population in Japan and a huge birth rate uh declining, which has led to a shrinking pool of 18 years old. And I'll be showing you the statistics next year, which shows you like there's almost of half population for 18 years old in the 1992 in the next 5 years compared to the next 5 years was next like securing career placements, which is a huge like social pressure in Japan or in other Asian cultures in Korea, which where I'm from. And degrees in universities like is really meant for their stability or like their fame, their and just basically guaranteeing your future. Universal access. So university in Asia is more like it's more like so it's basically like the whole system, like the whole education for university is just really for the more like the broader like the population. And this situation has led to competition between other schools to attract other better students from around the world or the globe. But I'll be talking about this in the later slides. And for my personal thoughts, early job hunting, which is getting earlier and earlier, like in the recent years, is actually, I think, like disrupting the will and like your motivations to learn something in the school. And lastly, for my part, like the future outlook, which is so this is the part I also want to talk about in the slide before. So universities in Japan is actually attracting more foreign students from around the world. So I'm personally from Korea as well. And like although I'm not in like English programs, like there are other classes that are also in English, like the GIS or GBPs in OSE as well. And lastly, I'll be talking about adaptation to AI in like the modern industries where like industries in terms of like job hunting in these industries actually they cooperate with the universities to support the students' career path. Like they actually have different programs in the school's career center. They will they will support the students and push to produce graduates who are also adaptable, changing AI-driven global job market. And this statistics, like I brought this picture here because I wanted to talk about like if you look at 2010, there's Vietnam, which is on the more increase recently, and other like Philippines, the most East Southeast Asian nations, uh, getting their proportion in Japan as foreign residents. So basically, this is due to their policies that started in around 2010 from the government, like bringing in more foreign students and workers to fill the population. And this actually has led to universities, like allowing universities to get more foreign students as well. Okay, that's it for my part.
All right, moving on to my parts. I'm first going to go over why we chose the US. I think we chose it mainly because it was a very different higher education system compared to Japan. And also, a lot of Japan's education kind of stems from the US, especially after World War II. They sort of took a lot of they took a lot of the democratic teachings, things like that. But both countries have well-known universities and have highly educated graduates, but they both reach that goal in different ways. I think one of the biggest differences is that each country has different values. In the United States, at least, higher education is built around individual freedom and flexibility. So students can choose from many different schools and even like switch majors through like a couple years into their programs. And they also have a wider option of electives, especially like for my home university. You can take electives from like languages, liberal arts, and even some specific program stuff. And it kind of just allows you to create a path that best fits your own interest. And then Japan, I think they just tend to be a little more structured. Like you're, if you choose a program, you're kind of like stuck into that program and you have to go through it. So it's more organized from the beginning. But not saying that in a way that either system is better, but I think it shows the different priorities of the two countries. And throughout my portion, I'll show like the many strengths and weaknesses of America. All
Could you
right,
tell me when
moving
to?
on.
Okay.
The I think the first priority that we can see is the accessibility through choice. Instead of like being stuck through one pathway, the US gives multiple options. For example, like there's public schools, private schools, and community colleges. Some even come later back after working for a couple of years. And I think financial aid, grants, scholarships are also available to help afford students or to help afford people to pay for college. The goal is to make higher education available to as many people as possible, even if they come from different backgrounds. I think this reflects the American value of individual freedom because students have the ability to choose the path that works best for them. 'Cause- However, like even with this freedom, it has its own challenges. I think students have to be a little more decisive in what they want, which can be rough. 'Cause for example, my major is management information systems, and finding a college that suits the career path I wanted to go to is pretty hard, especially because my career path is kind of specific, and sometimes finding specific majors is pretty hard. But along with that, you also have to be keeping in mind the financial aid for school, understanding how the transfer system works, and like it gives so many opportunities, but there's a lot of responsibility on whether or not you make the right choice. And moving on to community colleges. Community colleges are probably one of the best ways that the US shows that flexibility. In a sense, community college allows you to either like do a 2-year program, do certificates, or just even doing specific real world job training, like welding, for example. There's programs for it that take a couple months, but I think the most common route that people take is finishing their associate's degree at a 2-year college and then transferring to a 4-year university. Because many community colleges have open admissions as long as you have a high school diploma. And it's also the much more affordable option. So it just allows more, there's a lot more freedom in it. And then you can also move to a school that will finish your 4-year degree if you're like unsure of what you wanted to do beforehand. So that's more of that like freedom piece, and it gives you a lot of choice. And then this system exists because it reckons that like people don't follow the same pathway, and some students may have different financial situations, GPA problems, anything of that nature. And I think that's one of the biggest strengths of the American education system, at least for universities, because it creates more opportunities for more people to succeed. But at the same time, it also shows one of the trade-offs. Because students can take like all these wide variety of paths, their experiences can change greatly. Like some students graduate from prestigious, like named universities, while others may struggle to transfer credit from a community college for their degree. So that same flexibility is almost like a double-edged sword in some cases. And moving on, public versus private universities. I think another example of the individual choice is the difference between public and private universities. Public universities get funding from state governments, so some in-state students pay much lower tuition and often have bigger campuses, more students, and sometimes more opportunities. On the other hand, private universities are mostly funded through their tuition, donations, and they're usually more expensive, but they often have a smaller class size, so more one-to-one with the teacher. And there's also more specialized academic programs. This gives like many different options depending on what you're looking for. Like some students value the affordability, while others prioritize smaller classes or the reputation of a private university. In the US, I believe you get more opportunities because of the name of your university, which is also a very big advantage for some majors. And again, like it's just another example of the individual freedom. Students can choose what type of education they want, but it just makes big problems because there's different costs, requirements, and then not every student has the equal amount of resources to make it to some universities that they may want to. Mm, I think that idea comes even more important when we compare it to Japan. I think there's a bigger gap between the two in the sense where Japan is more straightforward, and if you pass your entrance exams and get to college, you almost have something guaranteed for you at the end, compared to the US where it could go either way. All right, moving on. Some of the modern issues that the US is facing, at least, is the rise of tuition. In the past 20 years, on this graph right here, it shows that tuition has been exponentially rising due to multiple things, but and then it makes it more difficult for students to get into universities they want because most schools are funded by scholarships. And without the scholarships, it almost makes it impossible to go to these private universities. And because of that, student debt is a related issue to that because people take out massive loans for their academic careers. And typically the price varies between like 10,000 to 70,000 just for tuition every year. So it's super unfair to some people because of the inequality of incomes. And sometimes that allows for people with higher incomes to get better opportunities, better education. And that also causes a gap for completing your education too. Because of the wide variability, the US has a smaller graduation rate than Japan. I believe it's around 50% for the US. And typically, either students get weeded out or it's too expensive. And that's the main correlation of why people drop out. All right, moving on, we're going to be comparing the two now. I think after looking at both education systems individually, it now lets us compare the things that shape them. While both the United States and Japan aim to prepare students for successful careers and contribute to their societies, the way they approach higher education is very different. In terms of the US, universities generally place a greater emphasis on student choice and flexibility. Students often have the freedom to choose their majors, take electives outside their fields, and transfer between universities, or even change academic directions during degree. There are also multiple pathways in higher education, including community colleges, part-time or online study, and that just shows even more that students should have opportunities to build on and any educational path that they see fit for them and their circumstances. On the other end of that, Japan universities tend to place a greater emphasis on structure and academic consistency. So students typically apply directly to a specific faculty or department with a single test, and their degree requirements are often more clearly defined from the beginning. I think while there is some flexibility, the overall experience of their education is generally standardized to make sure that students within the same faculty are receiving a similar education. Lastly, in their final 2 years, they make efforts into getting jobs and building their career. These differences don't mean that one system is better than the other, but instead they reflect different educational priorities. The US emphasizes the flexibility and individual choice, while Japan emphasizes consistency, academic structure, and progression. These priorities create different strengths and challenges, which we'll compare next. And then moving on, after looking at both the education systems, we can see that many of their strengths and weaknesses come from what each country values most. The United States, at least, emphasizes, again, the freedom and flexibility, and Japan is more on equality, academic achievement, and consistency. And in the US, students have many different pathways to earn a degree. They can begin at any university and transfer or switch between them, maybe even later in life too. In Japan, students typically follow a more structured pathway where they have to enter university directly after high school, and there are fewer opportunities to change directions once they're enrolled. Another difference is the admissions. American universities often evaluate students using multiple things, such as grades, essays, extracurriculars, and recommendation letters, and sometimes either the SAT or ACT as standardized tests, while Japan universities heavily rely on entrance exams, creating a more standardized admission process. And we can also see the differences in university structure. American universities have more freedom to design their own programs and degree requirements, while Japan universities tend to provide a more consistent academic experience across schools. Neither approach is inherently better than the other, but the flexibility, I believe, gives more opportunities for students, but it can also lead to greater inequality because access and costs vary widely. Japan's system provides more consistency and equal expectations, but students generally have fewer opportunities to customize their education or change paths. I think ultimately, like both systems reflect values of their own societies. The USA prioritizes that individual freedom and choice, while Japan prioritizes equality, academic achievement, and consistency. I think these priorities are what creates the strengths and weaknesses we've discussed throughout this presentation. And moving on, we just have our references. That's all. Thank you.